Talk Business with Barbados Chamber of Commerce and Industry, BCCI. Welcome as we hear the perspectives of various subject matter experts and stay up to date on the challenges and solutions around emerging and current trends in business, policies, trade, and more. Let's Talk Business with the Barbados Chamber of Commerce and Industry is brought to you by Sagicor Cave Hill School of Business and Management and Barbados Public Workers Cooperative Credit Union Limited, BPWCCUL.
Hi, and welcome to Let's Talk Business with the BCCI. I'm your host, Michelle Spencer, and today we have a look at the challenges and opportunities for the business sector for 2024. My guest today is BCCI President, Mr. Jimmy Clarke. Welcome, Mr. Clarke, and a Happy New Year to you.
Thanks very much, Michelle, and Happy New Year to you as well. Thank you for having me on your show.
You are most welcome. Now, before we get into looking at 2024, let's take a look back at 2023. Now, we obviously came out of one of the busiest seasons for the business sector. Can you give us a little bit of a review of what it was like?
There certainly seemed to be a lot more activity than there was obviously in prior years as the island recovers. It seems like there was a lot more visitor activity. There were some concerns, of course, with people getting their shipments in time. There are a couple of issues with that, shipping delays and then port congestion when the cruise liners take up space in the port, obviously, to offload people. And then the cargo ships have to wait to go at a later time or a different day or this type of thing. So you get these kind of delays, not to mention the seasonal volume that you get towards the end of the year. So there's a lot of things happen at that time, but it just seems that everybody did have a good season from what we can gather.
Okay, Mr. Eddie Abed would have mentioned those concerns in a previous program. So how did that actually turn out for us? As you said, many persons seem to have managed it well, but give us a little bit more insight as to how it turned out.
Well, certainly you do have stocks and they tend to order things well in advance. So there's usually buffer as well. And then people know, of course, if you get something early December, the chances of getting it out of the port and getting it unstuffed and onto the shelves, can take a bit of time. It doesn't give people much time before Christmas to actually purchase the items. So importers tend to get their things well in advance. So even if there was a slight delay this time around, it would still have put them in reasonable stead, even if it was a bit later than they would have liked. But they generally have enough buffer in there so that they are prepared, not to mention stocks that they would have had anyways, knowing the variability of these supply chains and the length of time it's been taken generally to get goods into the island.
Let's talk a little bit about that supply chain challenge. And we know that it has been mentioned for a while to be continuing. What does 2024 look like with regard to that?
Well, if you're following the news, you can see almost daily there's issues in the Red Sea, certainly with random attacks on shipping vessels traversing there, forcing shipping lines to divert around the Cape, so around the southernmost point of Africa. And that adds about 6,000 kilometers to their journey, or about 8 to 10 days. So on a transit time, so you can imagine the additional cost in fuel and crew time. And also the seas in that part of the world tend to be quite rough and dangerous. And about 30% of the world's trade goes through the Suez Canal, as an aside. The Panama Canal continues to suffer from drought, and that has reduced the shipping capacity through there significantly. Let's put it this way, in November last year, they were doing about 32 ships a day. As of February this year, there are about 18 reserve slots. So you can see there's a tremendous difference. And not only that, the draft or the amount of water that the ship draws is limited by the amount of water in the locks of the Panama Canal. So therefore, if the ship draws more water than what they have to offload containers on the Pacific side and ship them by rail over to the Atlantic side and then reload them onto the ship for it to go on its way. So all these things take time. Now, the drought, of course, we're at the mercy of the weather. So there's whenever that happens to resolve itself. And then in the Middle East, there's certainly great uncertainty and insecurity, and it almost seems like every day now there's somebody else is attacking somebody else. So the region there is very unstable. And the shipping rates, of course, have gone up tremendously. So there is a big concern that these two events that affect the two main shipping routes in the world will go on for an indeterminate amount of time. So that means that with the longer delivery times and so on, and now we're at the beginning of the year, any importers are going to be doing their projections and having to add even more time and having to order their goods even farther in advance so that they can get them in time, hopefully. Of course, the Chinese New Year is in February, so all the factories there are basically winding down now to take part in that, and everybody will be on holiday, and then they fire back up in late February and March. So anything coming from the Far East, you're going to have to order early for sure. That isn't to say that you will not be able to get things. It's just going to take even longer, likely, to actually get them in hand. Because many items, especially hard goods, are manufactured from components from different suppliers all over the world. It's what's going on in their neck of the woods. Can they actually get the components out? We saw a lot of equipment delays and so on in 2020, well, through COVID and even the last 2 years, largely not because of lack of manufacturing capacity, but because of delays in components. You know, you could have a car sitting on the line and it needs a part for the engine and they don't have them. So the car just sits there. That's the type of thing that's been going on. So we're still in an unstable environment, and it just means that we have to relook at the ordering early. We got to relook at our supply chains, where we're getting goods from. Can we get them from countries within the Atlantic region, North America, Europe, Africa, South America, and even our neighbors, to hopefully mitigate against some of these shipping challenges?
How easy is it to manage a business in light of all of these challenges?
Let's put it this way, very challenging, from interesting to challenging, and sometimes downright frustrating. That is how we can put it. And that's the truth. It can be very, very challenging because your customers have certain expectations, you have certain deadlines that you aim to meet, and sometimes there's many things beyond your control that you just don't have any control over certain situations. And from what we've seen, some of them can change in an hour, in 5 minutes, or the next day. So, already to deal with Panama, that not to just go on about the canals too much, but I mean, ships had been going around the other way around and coming through the Suez instead of going through Panama Canal. Now that has its own issues. So, people are rethinking where they're getting their stuff from, how are they getting it there. I understand that Mexico has a rail link that they're opening up to facilitate transport of cargo from the Pacific to the Atlantic through Mexico. So that would be another help. But yeah, it can be very challenging because you plan as best you can, but you need multiple, especially with the supply chain, you have to have multiple sources, whether you buy from the Far East or whether you buy from within the Atlantic basin or wherever, but you've got to have multiple sources for sure.
Hearing a conversation like this, the average Barbadian will say, oh my goodness, this is going to place a strain on my pocket. So, what does that mean for those who will be shopping on a daily basis?
Shipping costs tend to be roughly in the range of 5 to 10% of any item that lands on the island. If you see a 10% increase in shipping costs, that results in, say, a 1% increase in the cost of goods. So it's when it gets even higher, so when it gets up in 2 and 3 times, that you start to see a more marked effect. So this is why you will find importers and so on being conscious of what the market can bear in terms of pricing, of looking for alternate sources of goods to try to maintain or to get at least certain goods on the shelves and try to maintain those prices. Because clearly, I mean, prices just escalating and escalating. I mean, people have already felt it. We've seen the pressure of inflation in 2023. Obviously, we await the report from the governor of the central bank for the last quarter of 2023. But his report up to the end of September last year showed that the inflation was actually coming back down. So it'll be interesting to track it now to see what impact this is going to have. The other thing too is coming out, well, when I say coming out shortly, the Federal Maritime Commission in the United States, they're doing an investigation into the shipping costs. And they're having a hearing early in February to investigate this, because obviously this has an impact on them as well. So I can't say definitively the prices are going to go up or down. All I can say is that, we are aware that the world is extremely volatile right now, and the companies will certainly do their best to keep their prices as even as possible.
Okay, with that in mind, we would have also heard about a reduction in the costly container charges. I think it was sometime in April last year, and the Prime Minister also addressed it in January. Can you tell us what that might mean? Will that mean that we also see a reduction in the cost on the shelves?
Well, we did an informal poll of our members and we got 12 responses from our importers, and 11 out of the 12 said that they had not seen these reductions, and in some cases, they had seen increases. So that means that we are going to need to engage the port and customs and so on as a chamber and compare notes to find out, what's happening. The port is saying, yeah, we have a reduction, and the importers are saying, no, we're not seeing a reduction. So we need to dig into that further to find out what's going on, to actually compare figures and make sure that we're comparing apples with apples. On the surface, that's just the initial feedback.
Okay, so once your fruit line up, will consumers see a reduction in costs?
Once the fruit lines up. Let's put it this way. The way things are priced coming through the port, if there is a genuine reduction, as I said before, if you can see a 10%, say, reduction in the shipping costs, and the shipping costs are 5 to 10% of the cost of any item that goes on the shelves, that's a half to a 1% reduction, right? Filtering through. So it is small, but in theory, you should see a reduction. We as a chamber, we have zero control, of course, over pricing from our stores. We are an advocacy organization and we seek to advise and also to advocate on behalf of our members. But certainly, I would expect in the way these things are normally calculated that if there are savings to be had, they're generally passed on.
Okay. If there are any areas that you might be able to see or project that we might see maybe an increase in the cost, are there any specific areas or specific commodities that we might expect to see a rise in the cost?
I haven't actually looked at the things certainly like wheat and so on. I mean, I did see a comment from the Ukraine that they had got their wheat exports back up to pre-war levels, which is good. And certainly, I guess it depends on the impact of, say, weather conditions and geopolitical issues are happening in any given area and what tends to come out of that area, or where you may see shortages and so on. I mean, even in Barbados, I mean, we saw the effects of the heat wave last summer and then the intense rainfall that we had afterwards. Certainly, farmers here have experienced serious shortages in certain crops because they just were destroyed by those conditions. And if that's happening here again, which 2024 seems to be projected to be another hot one, I mean, this could have a serious impact on our food supplies. So food, of course, continues to be an issue as you get these severe weather events around the world. What does it do to actual food production in any given jurisdiction? Also, you can have political issues in certain areas that cause problems for exports. I think they had some of that coming with fruit and so on coming out of South America last year. So these are the things to watch. Food is a big one. We all need it, and the weather is clearly not what it used to be, and we have to be very, very careful. I know the government is building a food repository here in Barbados. I think last year, if we get many, many continuous hot years like this, it's changing our whole environment. And how we produce food is going to be of a critical, critical importance. And can we always rely on our traditional sources of import in case they have their own issues and they may not be able to export to us? So food security is a major, major, major concern. These are things that need to be looked at and are being looked at very, very, very carefully.
Okay. Well, we're having a chat with the BCCI president, Mr. Jimmy Clarke, as we examine the challenges and opportunities for the business sector in 2024. You're listening to Let's Talk Business with the BCCI. Let's turn the corner and look at some of the opportunities that will be coming up for business. I know that we have heard about the introduction of a ferry service. And you've mentioned, you have to examine different ways of getting those commodities into Barbados. What's the BCCI's outlook on this ferry service?
I think the ferry service is an excellent development. Traditionally, interregional, intra-regional travel, as we know, has been difficult at best in terms of even shipping or even aircraft and so on, and cargo services, especially provision of less than container load services between islands and so on. So something like a ferry service where you can load on, say, smaller volumes of cargo in one destination and within 12 to 24 hours have it somewhere else without having the expense of air freight and so on, that's really, really good. And the hope is that if you can develop with a service like that, if you can develop trade even in smaller quantities and help grow the markets, and each country, say, can grow its export business for what they're good with, providing they have the capacity to export, that may grow into larger shipments where you can actually ship container loads and so on. And it also highlights, like what do we have as a region? What does every country have that they're good at, that they produce well, that they grow well, that they have quantity of that they can export, so that we can get our food, say, back to the food again. Can we get our food from our region? Can we be self-supporting as a region? Not saying that you wouldn't import things from overseas or certain things that we don't make here, but in terms of opportunities, is that something that we need to revisit? Does it make sense now with this renewed focus and the issues with shipping and so on? Does it make sense now to start increasing some of our food, even processed food, agro-processing, all of these things within the region so that we can be more self-sufficient and are less at the mercy of global forces of transport and fuel costs and so on? And also I think anybody that has booked a flight within the region in recent times will realize that sometimes it's more expensive than going to the United States. So I think having alternate options for transport of people is also an excellent development.
How can smaller businesses capitalize on this opportunity?
Well, they can capitalize on it now because they actually will have a way of shipping goods, hopefully at a reduced cost and in less than container load. As the chamber understands that between islands, if you want to ship a pallet, there may not be that service or two pallets or whatever, or it can only be in a container, then you have to pay for the whole container, not the small amount, or you have to try and send it by air freight. So if you have a sea freight option for smaller quantities of goods, that should make the cost of shipping to another market reduced. So, of course, that makes it more attractive to your importer in that market. So, hopefully, it will facilitate the increased interregional trade.
Will the BCCI be looking to maybe educate or even, as you say, facilitate the trade between the islands? Smaller persons might not know exactly how to go about capitalizing on the opportunity. How can the BCCI help?
The BCCI generally, in these cases, will obviously learn about the service and what it means. And it does help its members in terms of, any requirements to get into certain areas, certain countries. The Chamber also maintains relationships generally both in the Caribbean chambers of commerce and also individual chambers, say like in Guyana and Suriname and so on. And basically, we assist. If we have a service like this and somebody says, "Look, I need to export or I wish to get into this market," we can get in touch with the chambers. And this is an opportunity. We have interest here and what is required. And also, do you have people who who can put this person in touch with who are in that line of business or who may be interested in working with them. So there's all these types of services that the chamber offers to its members when it comes to these things. Obviously, there are other institutions and organizations in Barbados that help Caribbean export and so on. So the chamber is not the sole repository of this information, but this is just things that we can provide to our members.
What are some of the other opportunities that you can see for 2024?
Well, the other opportunities are certainly, well, I see the Cricket World Cup is coming up, so that's actually really good. I think from the tourism sector, having year-long series of events, it seems to be very good at maintaining the visitor arrivals throughout the year, whether it's sporting or some kind of entertainment or whatever the case may be, that having more of these things seem to attract people in the out of season periods. So I see that there's more of that activity as things, everybody can congregate again and people are back to traveling clearly. The other thing is, of course, as I said, we spoke about was food and agro processing, food processing, and these types of things. to produce things locally or even regionally that we can use here. And the other area, of course, is digital services as everybody moves away from paper. And it's something that can be done locally, so digital services for local businesses, or it can be digital services that you could have a global audience for, that you don't need to leave Barbados for. It's something that you can develop here and export. So we see those as areas that are A, critical, and of course B, topical in this current environment. And then, of course, well, I know the energy is kind of up in the air at the moment until the battery storage gets sorted out. But once that gets done, hopefully this year, you will see that industry continue to march on. Certainly, for the moment, the commercial systems will be generally paused, although you will see people will still build them in anticipation of the battery storage. But then residential, of course, will still continue apace because the oil prices, of course, now trending back upwards. So we see opportunities certainly in the renewable energy sector. Those are some of the main areas.
Well, I know that people will be rejoicing in terms of being able to get into the food and production and so on. But it's always been a bugbear that those products produced locally seem to be more expensive. Is there anything on the horizon that will say, yes, we can do it cheaper?
Well, that then comes down to each business analyzing their production costs. So I think there is a facility at Newton where you can actually have access to commercial food preparation facilities, basically for a fee. So you don't have to buy them yourself. So you don't have to have $100,000 worth of equipment necessarily if it can be done in that facility. You pay a fee, you bring your ingredients and your packaging and so on, and you get it processed and packaged and everything ready to go there. So that saves you on your labor, which you can be doing something else with at the time, like marketing and running your business, while your foodstuffs are being produced and prepared for market. So that is one option in terms of processing. But yeah, it also highlights, if you import things that you have to import, ingredients or anything special, everything has a cost, and all of the costs along the line, shipping, duties, costs of doing business, rents, energy, staff, and so on and so forth, all of these things feed into the costs. And if they end up costing more locally, you can see the effect. We live on an island in the middle of the ocean. I mean, this is what it's like. If you're in a massive country that has hundreds of millions of people, and the economies of scale are huge. But for small people here, yeah, I mean, some of this stuff is more expensive, but the quality is often far superior to some of the mass-produced items. So again, this is where your marketing and so on comes into play. You go very much on quality wherever possible. And it's hard to compete sometimes with mass-produced items. So this is why, you see a resurgence in interest now. Instead of distilleries exporting vast quantities of bulk alcohol, you're making high-end finished products, so very value-added products rather than dealing in commodities. So those are the opportunities where that is concerned in terms of food.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Mr. Clarke. We've looked at the challenges, we've looked at the opportunities, and there seems to be some sort of hope on the horizon if you know where to look. Thank you so much. We've been chatting with the BCCI president, Mr. Jimmy Clarke, as we took a little closer look at the challenges and opportunities for the business sector for 2024. Mr. Clarke, I wish you a wonderful year.
Thank you so much, Michelle. Very kind of you to have us on. And likewise, we really are looking forward to 2024 being, in spite of everything that's going on, that we sail through this. Will not be without its challenges, but that we sail through this very well, having built on our experiences from prior years. So we're very hopeful that this will be a good year.
And we are looking forward to a good year with you as well. You've been listening to Let's Talk Business with the BCCI. I'm Michelle Spencer. Have yourself a wonderful day.
That's it for another edition of Let's Talk Business with Barbados Chamber of Commerce and Industry, BCCI. Join us again next time as we hear the perspectives of various subject matter experts and stay up to date on the challenges and solutions around emerging and current trends in business, policies, trade, and more. Let's Talk Business with the Barbados Chamber of Commerce and Industry is brought to you by Sagicor Cave Hill School of Business and Management and Barbados Public Workers Cooperative Credit Union Limited, BPWCCUL.